So, Dr. Cissy, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I really don't remember even how we connected on Instagram, but like just me putting my
The
watch.
algorithm brought me to you.
No. Mujevale, Mujevale, Mujevale. My name is Bani Kibuka, and welcome to another episode of the Ugandan Boy Talk Show. So that's how we connected. There's a lot of people I've connected with this platform, and I tell people all the time, like internet is a good place. It brings a lot of good things to you, to your life, to what you do, and getting to meet people. Like here we are. We've
Yeah.
never physically met, but we met
Yeah.
through
Social
Instagram,
media.
social media.
Yes. If you use it, if you
Yeah,
use it, a lot
in
of
a
people
good
are so
way.
afraid of it. And
Yeah.
I think the worst thing you can do if you're out there watching this and you are one of those lurkers, please, what are you doing? Like, what is the point? Being online, you look at people's posts, you don't comment, you don't like, you do nothing. Like, it's like being at a party, but you're like by the sidelines. So I would invite you to come in, join the
Mhm.
party. I've done a live on this on my Instagram
Yeah.
about how I changed from being also one of those people who never post to do anything to
Mhm.
being pretty active. Yeah.
People being in Kamoli, just they
Yes. Mube mkamoli.
yeah. There's a lot of goodness out here in the internet, and I'll add on to what you just say. Like, there's a lot of good things that come with that. Get to meet people, get to create things. It can be a source of income. You can make money from it. So it's a tool that's there that needs you to tap in. And even if you're not focusing on making money, it's a tool where you're gonna meet people, learn new things, and do better things. So all of you guys who are listening to this right now, yeah, we're calling you to come and join in. So anyway, I was planning a conversation, and like I tell my guests when we talk, like I'm trying to go away from these regular interviews where people have like a list of questions to go. Like I just want a conversation with somebody that somebody can follow obviously about a goal. It's not like I just
Not
about
just random. Yeah,
it's
you need
not
to have
just
some
something.
sort of structure.
Right. But
Mm,
I feel like once you have that as a host in your head, like where you want the conversation to go, the drive,
mm,
the freestyle thing comes in where somebody didn't prepare for that, or like I mean, those are like conferences where somebody had to prepare, like to give
like Q and A's.
exactly. But I wanted to start this with you, a mother, and you've shared on Instagram. You shared about your life. You share about everything. And actually, before I ask you all, or before we have the conversation, I'm gonna start with something that I had on my notes. That it's somewhere below all the questions I had, but I want to put it first so we can discuss on that before we go into everything. You shared something on your story, and I see a lot of things on your story. You share about everything and teach people. You teach us, you share your thoughts and everything. But one day you shared this quote that somebody had shared that about oversharing, and
Ah,
and
right.
you had to talk about that, and you had to like you disagreed with actually what the quote was saying because of your
Mm,
own opinions.
yeah.
So what do you talk about? Like it said, move in silence, and you
Yes, yes,
disagree with
yes.
that, and
Yeah.
you're not that type of person who moves in silence. You like to share your stuff, and like obviously, here are some of the things you're going to be sharing about your life, what you do. What made you disagree with that about people who go with that, like we're moving in silence?
I think moving in silence has been over glamorized. There's all these quotes about move in silence, protect your energy. That's what we're talking about. And I think a lot of people go astray when they are moving in silence. Like you move in silence in the wrong direction. I
Hmm.
think there's a lot of that. And I've found it's only been positive in my opinion anyway, in terms of sharing. Because when I share something about my life, a lot of times I feel like it helps me because it's therapeutic in that I'm telling my story, or my stories are like kind of like journals for myself, putting your thoughts out of your head and writing them down.
Hmm.
So it helps you first of all, but also it helps someone else because I also saw another quote which says that your story will be someone else's like roadmap. And so one of the things that I shared about is about my very difficult pregnancy and childbirth. And I got feedback from someone who'd gone through exactly the same thing, except that she was um, later on in the process. So meaning everywhere that I'm going and I keep sharing, she is also going through the same thing. And so like, what would be the point of moving in silence with that? I think maybe people are maybe if you've been hurt in the past, obviously it's understandable. You have all these traumas, you told someone your secret and then they betrayed you. Probably maybe that's where that kind of thing is coming from. But maybe you should give people a chance. We're not all the same.
Yeah.
We're not the ones who hurt you, you know. Look for the good in the world, because there's some bad people and there's some bad things, but generally speaking, I think it's more good in the world, especially if you look for it. Yeah.
I like how you put it. The reason why you share what you share, and I think I'll call myself an oversharer. Maybe I used to do it a lot back in the day, like with Facebook. Like I would post literally everything that happens to my life, like even what I ate for breakfast. You know,
Yeah.
like
It was like a journal.
yeah. So, but I see the point. What you're saying, like especially sharing things about your life that are going to help somebody else. When you feel like you got to say, just share it. Somebody is going through the same thing, and that's why I started a podcast too, because I wanted to
Mm,
share our stories. I want to share. I started by sharing my own stories because I'm like, somebody's going to listen to my podcast, and then they will learn something from it. And then I
yeah.
was like, there's other people out there who have different stories to share. That people, when they listen to the podcast, that's why today I'll have a dancer, tomorrow I have a teacher, tomorrow I have a model, tomorrow I have a doctor. Like I know that all these people have stories they can share for other
Mm,
people to learn. So I don't see any problem with somebody. That it's just if they are willing to share. If that's all that I'm concerned about. If somebody is
mm.
willing to share, don't stop them. But if they're not, don't force them to share.
Exactly. And also, if you feel it on your heart that you want to share something or you want to say something, do it. We're not saying go out and start telling people things that you yourself are not comfortable about. Like usually there will be a reason that you feel like you want to share something. So although it might look like oversharing to others and not to someone else. Like
Mm,
some of the things that I've talked about, for instance, to me are not a big deal. Like it's not like a big deal to me personally. And
mm,
then I'll get comments like, oh my gosh, you're so brave. How can you talk about this? Um, and actually, so really, I think it's very subjective. So you do you people. Everyone should just do whatever they want to do. Don't be restrained or constrained by other people's opinions. Because, yeah.
And that's why I wanted to bring that first before we go into today's topic. Because some of the questions I was going to ask you, it's something you've shared on your Instagram, something you've shared about your life. And
Yeah.
that's why I want you to share it because I know somebody else is going to benefit from it. But I'll
Yeah.
start with my first question that I was not a question, but like what I wanted to talk about the way you manage life of being a mother. I know you're a mother. I know
Yeah.
there's a lot of mothers following you. There's a lot
Yeah.
of girls who are planning to go into motherhood. How do you handle being a mother and then do these other jobs that you do and even your content on Instagram? How do you handle that time?
Okay, so first of all, my baby might actually show up soon. Because it's just perfect timing. Like the timing is always the worst. Like when I need to be busy is when now he starts getting fussy. So which brings me also to my answer, which is that right now he's with his dad. So for me personally, my motherhood has been greatly influenced by the father of my kids, who is my husband and the love of my life, the wind beneath my wings, and there he is looking actually. So I'm going to go grab the baby
Okay.
and so yes, I was here talking about the love of my life. Here he is, who's obviously you can't see him, listeners, but also here is a baby.
I, yeah.
um anyway, your motherhood journey
Hmm.
will be affected by who you decide to have kids with. Okay. So I'll try and just keep talking and hopefully we can go on.
Hmm.
Um so yeah, your motherhood is going to be affected mostly by who you have your kids with. So
Right.
for me, I feel like I'm able to do so much, or I appear like I'm doing so much because I have a life partner. I'm not doing life alone.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know, a lot of people are married, or maybe they're not married, but they are with their partners, but the dad doesn't do anything. They just
Right.
live within the house and become like another child. Like
Mm-hmm.
they become like your firstborn. Even when I had just gotten married, I remember someone telling me, and Uncle Man was telling me, "Oh, you know, now your husband is like your firstborn." I was like, "What are you talking about?" So
Yeah.
imagine you have all these kids to take care of, and then you have also someone else, like an adult, to take care of. So
Mm-hmm.
for me in my life, I do everything with my husband. So even my content and my YouTube channel. So for like the first at least 8 months to a year,
Mm-hmm.
he does everything in terms of setting up my lighting, background, and then he does the editing. So for me, I'll just show up.
Mm.
Even my reels, all that stuff, he'll do everything. Yeah? Although he's taught me a lot of the things, so
Yeah.
I'm also able to now do a lot of like I can edit. He's taught me a lot of the things because otherwise it was becoming a lot of work for one person.
Yeah.
And then even now I've come for the podcast and I told him about it. So it's like we have a joint calendar. So we knew we have a podcast today.
Mm-hmm.
And so he set up, so he's a creative, he's a musician,
Yeah.
he does photography, videography, all these cool things. He set up the podcast mic and he wants me to always be doing the best. Like don't just use just what's it called? The microphone of the laptop, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
put this up, and then I'm having proper lighting. Like always trying to go for like quality, top
Yeah.
quality, top quality things. Like I'm representing the family, or I
Yeah.
guess also shows him in good light as well. So in terms of that, but also as a family, we are working together. So actually, he's a stay-at-home dad,
Mm-hmm.
and so right now on maternity leave, so we're both at home with the kids and
Okay.
working now on other stuff that we're working on. And when I go to work, so then he'll stay home and be with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
But also he will, like, I'm not going to have to come back from work and then start thinking about cooking.
Right.
Oh, now I have to do housework. Like I really lucked out
Mm-hmm.
in that my husband and we can both do everything. The only thing, actually, he does too much, and I often joke with him that the role is not to become a single father. Vanangi, touch susa. He can do everything. He can do everything. The only thing he can't do maybe is like breastfeed the babies.
Right.
Yeah. So that is why I'm able to do so much. Oh, I appear like I can do everything. Is that I have someone else. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing it on my own.
Yeah. I like
Mm.
the way you answered that, and that answers even the question. Like, even though the question was not asked about your husband, but like your answer explains why your husband comes into the answer of the question. Because once you have that kind of help, then it covers up what we don't see. Because for us, we're like, how does Dr. Cissy manage the kids, the social media, everything? But and that's why I like about the podcast, because when you ask people these questions, then you get the answers that you didn't know, and you will never know unless you ask the questions. So like for us, people who watch you from the internet will be like, eh, oh no, no, I call you car like now we call it what? But behind a successful woman like Cissy, there's somebody there giving our help. And I like that he's helping, and I like that he's being supportive and whatever he does for you. And I meant to say, actually, you should tell him this after the podcast. Like, your edits are on point. Like, I've watched a few of your YouTube videos, and I'm like, the zoom in, zooms out, like your punchlines, everything like comes out with like exact thing. And for me, a person who does everything by myself too, like, I know my wife has helped me. She was into like computers and editing and stuff. She kind of just showed me how to edit like one day.
Mm.
And I'm a fast learner too. So I do everything by myself, but she helped me. And if there's something like I want to create and I have the idea in my head, like I'll ask her like, hey, I have this idea, how can I execute it? And then we figure it out
Mm.
together, and then I'll go on. So I kind of helping. So it makes it easier when you have somebody like supporting you on the back and
Thank
helping
you.
you achieve that. So then that brings me to your relationship with your parents, and you've shared this on your stories too, like appreciating your mom and dad, and
Mm.
you went ahead to say like how they raised you motivates you to raise your kids. What was your talking? And I wanted to ask you about like to talk about your relationship growing up with your parents, and how it has helped you in your own family?
So I feel like I learn a lot from my parents, like we all do. But I think I am doing more active learning than the average person because I offer talk therapy. And there's a particular therapy kind that I love, which I do give, which is called cognitive analytic therapy. And it's about how we relate with others basing on how others related with us. And usually it's our primary caregivers, so our parents. So if they relate with you in a certain way, usually you're going to relate with, first of all, yourself like that, and also with others like that. So, for instance, if your dad or mom were really loving to you, you're going to learn to love yourself, and you also learn to love others. So, I feel like my parents really loved me. I feel like I feel loved. I felt loved, and so I feel because of that, I'm able to also love myself and also love others.
Right.
So that's the positives that I've gotten from my parenting. And even now, I feel like I talk to my parents a lot more than most people.
Yeah.
And they're always there for me. Like they've parented me up to this age. So when I was going to have a baby, for instance, my parents took me to the labor ward plus my husband. So I had like, they're like part of my team. And it was feeling like taking you like to school, to dropping you off. So they were there. They came to help look after the kids. And in terms of positives, I've learned a lot that I would love to do the same for my kids, from my parents. I
Yeah.
think it's because I know, for instance, I wasn't planned. I wasn't a planned pregnancy, but my mom didn't know she could conceive. So she had been told that she couldn't.
Yeah.
So I was like, I guess a happy surprise.
Miracle child.
Aha. in some way. So
Yeah.
having that knowledge that, oh, she was so happy, and a lot of the stories I hear from those days, I have
Mm.
that feeling of being loved. And then on the other hand, as they are not perfect human beings, there are mistakes that they've made. And so for instance, my I guess my inner critic is mostly from my mom. So she also was pretty critical.
Yeah.
And so that makes me maybe be critical of myself. But that also teaches me not to do the same to my kids,
Hmm.
to try and allow them to make mistakes because they're just kids. And yeah, I think it's been plus and minuses.
Right.
I feel like I'm learning from their mistakes, or I learned from their mistakes, and also from their good things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In your answer, you touched on a few things that I wanted to. So I wouldn't call myself a good listener, but like you can't have a podcast if you can't listen, or if you don't pick up on stuff people say, then it's pointless. And that's how I run. Like I like to listen to people and then ask them about that. You mentioned about you're going to labor and having your child, and one of your kids, Gabby, I think,
Yes.
name them Gabby.
Mm.
You also shared with us that she changed your life, and you went ahead to say like you wouldn't be where you are, like even in the UK
I
without.
wouldn't.
You want to expand on that? How to change your life?
So obviously before Gabby, or before having kids, honestly, I've said this before in my stories, but I was like living a soft life. You know the soft life trend
Yeah,
these days?
yeah.
That was me. My parents did their best to provide for me in like as much as they could. So for instance, I was driving to campus, yet I was staying in hostel. And my hostel was in Wandega in Katanga, but I was going
Mhm.
to Mulago. It was like 5 minutes drive. um I was provided for as much as anyone who can
Yeah.
imagine. And so even when I finished my internship, I moved back home, and I was working so in my parents' house. So you know how in Uganda we have maids,
Yeah.
there's outside guard, like you just bring your clothes and just put in the basket, and then they appear ironed. You just say, "Oh, mommy, I don't feel like eating this." Or if the food wasn't nice, I'd be like, "Oh, mommy, like I don't know, maybe you should talk to your maid. Like, please talk to your staff."
Hmm.
Oh my god, I feel like it was a bit. It sounds a bit spoiled in some way,
Hmm.
but to some extent, I think I was like I was just living just soft life. And so once I came to the UK, I hated it. It was horrible. It was cold. It was rainy, and I felt like I was suffering. I was walking, like using public transport to me was suffering, and yet I was pregnant. So if I wasn't pregnant, I would 100% have gone back home.
Hmm.
But I was pregnant, and now I had someone else to think about.
It's crazy, and I'll cut you short on there because
Yeah.
most people in Uganda don't think about this kind of life. But I mean, I don't blame them to the point because they don't know, they've never been in that situation. But even when I moved to the US the first time, I was ready to go back to Uganda because the life here was driving me like 180 miles an hour. I'm like, I can't keep up. I just want to go back to my slow life in Uganda. But I'm glad you shared. I like to hear about other people's experience when they move to a new country.
No, it was worse. Life was harder. So, but then I moved with my husband as well. And so he also was another motivator. He kept saying, "Taddayo mukyalo." Because we were living in Mityana when we first got married, because he was working in Mityana. So we were living mukyalo. Yeah. And
Mhm.
so he kept saying, "Taddayo mukyalo, you have to read." So he kept pushing me. um that was the first motivator, but also because I was pregnant, that was, I think, a bigger motivator, because I knew, like, the kind of life I knew I would regret it if I had the opportunity to stay here, and then now I go back to Uganda. So that's how it really motivated me to stay.
Right.
And then I feel like I was working even harder than I would have if I wasn't pregnant, because I had this, like, someone else who's looking up to me.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I think, sorry, every child comes with their blessings. So
Right.
I feel like Gabby's main blessing was for us to come to the UK and to be here and to persevere in those initial hard times. Like, that first year was really tough.
Yeah.
If I didn't have her to work for, I would have packed up and left, because no one had chased me from my home or from my parents' home.
Right.
Yeah.
That is cool to see, like how a child can also impact your life in a good way, and how they can motivate you, in what the decisions you do for your life. So now I'm gonna jump into your content creating. How or when did you know that I'm gonna start doing content creating? Because I've also seen some of your vlogs, the bath vlogs you did. When was the time you decided to choose this path to start doing content?
So in terms of content, I think I was a content consumer, like most of us are, for the longest time. And when you're a content consumer, you're such a good critic. You become an expert at, oh, this could be better, that could
Uh-huh.
be better. And then you start to feel like, I can do that too. But then that took years. I was in that phase for years, because I first wanted to start making YouTube videos, maybe in 2015, about natural hair.
Mhm.
Because I used to watch a lot of YouTube back then. That's where I learned how to do my hair on YouTube. And but then I just never did it. Actually, I did a video in 2016, which is now on my channel, but it was just for fun. But deep down, I really wanted to, but I didn't do it. So
Right.
it's something that kept lingering in my mind. I really wanted to do this, and so I eventually did it when I there was an Instagram account called the Mama's Circle. If you're a mom, you can follow. And on that account, they would encourage takeovers. So any of the followers can take over the account
Mhm.
for like a day. So I took over the account and I quite liked the experience. I was like, maybe I can do this on my account as well. And then I also did the YouTube as well at the same time. And yeah, I just did it one day
Okay.
in the right time for me. To me, it
Right.
was the perfect time for me. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you say like I'm waiting for the perfect time, you'll never get a perfect time. It's always just you can just start at that time. So
Yeah,
anytime is a perfect. Like I would say, anytime is a
that's
perfect time for you to
that's
start.
true.
That's a perfect time. And also I didn't say this in the introduction, but you are a psychiatrist and mental health, helping people figure out their own mind for a more fulfilling life. What made you choose that path? What did you want? Because I know everybody has a story on why they choose what they want. I mean, some people they might end up there because that's what was available. But what was the story for you to go into this field? Was there something behind that to make you choose that?
I have a video on this on my channel, but basically, in summary, for me personally, I was kind of recruited into psychiatry, because when I did psychiatry for my O level, in my undergrad, I in my undergrad I was the best in psychiatry,
Mhm.
and so then the professor called me and was like, "So, have you considered psychiatry?" And I was like, "Actually, I hadn't." As something for me I would do.
Mhm.
So then he sold it to me, told me how it was so cool, how it's good for work-life balance. Yeah, and then in that same semester, I was also the best in obstetrics and gynecology, which was the other course unit that we did. And I was feeling more like I wanted that,
Yeah.
but they didn't call me.
Yeah.
But also, I the smell of blood actually makes me faint. and I
Oh,
can't stand. Yeah, I can't stand for very long periods. So when I went into my internship and actually had to do C sections, like I couldn't do an entire C section without having to sit down. So really, that just confirmed it for me that that wasn't going to be
yeah.
an option for me. Yeah, and then with psychiatry also, I think I had because I like talking to people, I like finding out people's stories. I like to think about like what makes someone do something. Like I like to get into people's minds, or try and figure them out. I love all that kind of thing, so it works for me. And also, I have a family history of mental illness. I think everyone does, but I have a family member who has schizophrenia, and I helped her to get a diagnosis. That's when I was still in med school.
Yeah.
So schizophrenia is one of like the most classical mental illnesses, which is where you're hearing voices. And to me, I find that so scary. Like, can you imagine you're hearing voices, but like there's no one there? And most of the time it's negative things. Can you imagine every time you're hearing someone saying bad things about you?
Yeah.
So it made me feel like, well, first of all, it can happen to anyone. No one chooses this, but it can happen to you. So that's why I was like, I think I want to do that, because if that was me, I would want someone to help me.
Does that, when you mentioned that, actually, my brains went to something else. But I think it's about with writing a Musamero, like when we're in school, there's this kid that used to get possessed. Is that like cultural thing, or is that part of like Kwangango Muntu? Like she gets possessed, Naraniko Kogera, like in different voices. Like
Oh my god, that's I remember such things as well in my primary school. But I don't know. I don't know what that was about. I haven't come across it since. But in schizophrenia, in schizophrenia, it's you're not the one changing your voice. It's you're hearing voices in your ears.
that was crazy because I've not figured it out till today. Because there's this one gal. Every time we try to go call bibuzo like exams, and she would lose it. And like she every time, like they wouldn't let her take the exams. Like she would lose it. But I don't even know. But that yeah, I went to that. What are some of the stereotypes you've had about um people with Baba Itabacha? I don't know how you call them. Mamanyi Muluganda, like Bebasteke Butabika, like people who with mental illness, like I don't know. In Uganda, Chimanyi, like anytime when you have like a mental depression or something weird happens, they send you to Utabika. What are some of the stereotypes or the things we got wrong in Uganda we don't know because we lack education about people like that? The question that I wanted to bring up while we're talking about that was like, how do you call people? I think people with mental illness or
Or
some
mental health difficulties.
mental health difficulty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like there's a lot of like stereotypes and there's a lot of things that people in Uganda say about those people. And when something happens without knowing or know what's wrong with him, they just straight send you to Tabika. What are some of the things that we get wrong about people with mental difficulties?
I think the first thing is thinking that they're separate people from us. Like this is something that happens to other people. When
Mhm.
actually it can happen to anyone. The same way you can break your leg, you can have a mental health difficulty as long as you have a brain, as long as you have a mind.
Right.
So that's the first mistake I think is in separating and having that whole other and us. And so I myself have had PTSD, which I shared about on my account, the Tangled Mind. My PTSD story is over there. And anyone can have like the commonest cause of disability in the world, I think, is depression.
Yeah.
But I don't think we even have a word for depression
Hmm.
in Luganda. I don't think we have a word for depression, do we? Or
no, we don't.
any of them?
I've
Yeah.
never I've never even heard about it.
In most African languages, we don't have a word for depression. So
Mhm.
that's why people are easily considered like maybe that person is being lazy or they're just being, I don't know, like somehow it's blamed on the individual when
Yeah.
actually it's a problem that can be like the solutions that you can get. Also, another thing is the assumption that every mental illness is schizophrenia, which is the worst case scenario. Not worst case, but it's one of the worst ones, which is those people who you see maybe eating rubbish or things
Yeah.
like that. That's what people think of as someone having mental health difficulties. When you can just have depression, anxiety, even we have these things, but we just don't have names for them.
Exactly.
what you are describing with that girl who every time there's an exam, like it sounds like a mental health difficulty, some
Mm,
acute stress reaction, which is where there's a specific trigger, and like the stress and anxiety is too much, she just converts it into symptoms. Um, we have a lot of that,
yeah,
and also, you know how when we'd go for exams and people are like, oh, sometimes you feel like, oh, your heart is beating, your heart is
mm,
racing. Well, there's a client I was talking to, and she was telling about how she was in the car, but she was fearing. Then I told her that fearing sounds like anxiety. That's what some people would describe as anxiety.
yeah,
So we just don't have names for the things, but we feel all of them. Or we have all these things. People have
yeah,
anxiety, people have depression.
yeah.
But I think we're just not naming them.
And I think sometimes we also don't, like what you just said, literally, we have them, but we don't even know them. Like, unless somebody tells you, hey, if you explain to somebody, somebody will tell you, oh, that's depression if you're going through this. But because of our background, we relate everything to witchcraft. Oh, what work look? What work look?
Yes,
So,
yes.
so you also shared about being a Ugandan nurse in the UK. What is the experiences like? I know you've shared a lot of things about that, but like in the summary, and everything we're talking about here on my podcast, she has everything on her YouTube in details. Like she's gonna just summarize a few things or talk to you about some things. But I've watched the videos, and she talks in depth of all these things on her YouTube channel. So make sure after you listen to this podcast, you go back and check out her YouTube channel. I'll put in the description here and the link to her channel. But talk about being a Ugandan nurse in the UK. And,
Doctor, a
o-
Ugandan doctor.
okay, Ugandan doctor in the UK. Like, what's the experience like?
It's all right. I think it's fine. It's a good experience. I don't know. It's a very broad question, but I think it's fine. It's a good experience. I highly recommend. We should all have that experience of going out and seeing how things are like.
Yeah, I was gonna put it in because I know you shared something about the racism experience. Do you guys experience racism? And I know
Of
it's
course,
everywhere. Like,
of
like
course, we experience racism. Although American racism sounds a bit too much to me. How are you? I always tell my husband over to Uganda, America, and then he's like, Kwango Amasasi.
I was recording with that. I've recorded with a few guys from the UK. Hakim, they also have a podcast, the 256 podcast. And he literally say the same thing, like America. And it's tough. It's crazy. Some of the things are stupid, but you think of somebody like you would never do it to the other person, but like why do they even do it? And some of these
Yeah.
things, even like if even if they don't like shoot you or do, there are some things people do
Mm.
like one time I was like I've shared this on the podcast in some episode. Like I was at a gas station getting my gas, and I was all dressed up. I think I was from a speaking engagement somewhere down in Missouri, I think. And I went to a gas station to pump gas in my car. And because I was all dressed up, when you dress up a nice shirt, nice pants, and a belt, I usually don't wear belts unless I'm dressed up like in a fancy dress up. Or so my belt was sticking out because it wasn't like tight
Mm.
on the side. And then this guy was like, he started screaming that I had a gun, and like he's a white guy, like over there, like, oh my god, this guy has a gun. And I don't think it's illegal to have a
And
gun,
is that
but,
news in
but
America?
I know, like I was having a conversation with him because he was asking me how can I get on the freeway, and I was explaining to him how to get on the freeway. And the next thing you hear, the guy is screaming about you having a gun. And even if I had a gun at that time, like I wasn't pointing it at you, it was covered there. Like, but the guy was trying to make a big deal out of that, and
Yeah.
I told you know what, I need to get out of this place. But like, there's a lot more stories than that, but that was the funny
Yeah.
one. I'm like, people can hate you to some stupid things that
Mm.
but I know it's all over the place. So I'm gonna try to get you out of here because I know you have other things to do and things to work on. But one of the thing I wanted to touch on was about pregnancy, and you've mentioned this at the beginning when you were talking about your own experience, and you vlogged about um, having a child, Micah. You did like a vlog and how they did that 10 scans and MRI
Yeah.
and all that story. But one of the things you shared about that caught my attention was like 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. And you talked about you worked in like C-section
Mm,
area. Can you share about like something like that? Because that stuck out to me, like how what causes that. And I know you mentioned like there's nothing you can do to prevent it. Some of these things just happen. But
yeah.
share a little bit about that.
Um, so what brought this to my attention was that because I've had this was my third pregnancy, and I had a lot of bleeding. So to the point that I thought I had miscarried. And the people said, yeah, probably miscarried, although they didn't do a scan, which is a bit strange. Um, so anyway, so I knew I've had a miscarriage for like some 3 weeks of my life, until things changed and I went and I had another when I actually had a scan now and they said actually I was still pregnant. So during that period of knowing that I miscarried, I started reading up a lot about it because I knew about it, yes, but it's different when it happens to you. It's different when it happens to you or when you think
Right.
it's happening to you. So I remember feeling like maybe it was my fault. And yet I'm a doctor and I've given this news before. But I started thinking, oh, maybe it was that glass of wine that I had the other day. Or I remember I did this or the other. So there was a lot of, I think, trying to figure out what was the cause, what could have gone wrong, or how could I have prevented this. And it turns out that, yes, 1 in 4 pregnancies, so 25% of pregnancies that happen end in miscarriage. And a lot of times you don't even know you are pregnant. To be like at 4 weeks.
Mhm.
Maybe unless you're actively trying to conceive is when maybe you would know, because then you test very early. But yeah, people have miscarriages. They just don't talk about it.
Right.
And so I wanted to just do my part to spread awareness that if someone is out there and you have a miscarriage, it's really difficult, but it wasn't your fault. And it's one of those things that just happen sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like um people schooling us about things, like some of the things we don't know. And like not a knock to people in Uganda, but sometimes we don't want to do the research. We just don't push ourselves to research about things. And that's why now, at least if we talk about them and people listen to them, maybe they can learn that way. So, like, if we do the research and just talk about these things, and that goes back to the first thing we talked about in the beginning, like, people, you need to join internet because there's a lot of information that can help you, especially if
Yeah.
you're the type of person who likes to do research. Just come out here, go to Dr. Six's YouTube and just watch it. You're gonna learn a thing or two that's gonna help you and impact your life. And I also want to thank you because we've gone through this recording, like with you having the baby and taking care of the baby.
Sorry.
Hopefully people understand. And I think the award of the mother of the year for my podcast will go to you. Being able to manage all those. But I have a few questions that I like to ask my guests when I have them here. But before I ask those questions, I want to remind the listeners that everything we've talked about today was from her social media, and everything I've asked her, she has talked about this one out along on her YouTube channel. So go there and check them out, and then you'll learn something. What has been a life lesson you've learned in this life to this point?
The biggest life lesson I've learned recently is that I can die and I will die. It's a matter of when.
Yeah.
And that was learned. I learned that from my current pregnancy. So actually, if you don't know, that apparent miscarriage I just talked about, eventually I was still pregnant, and it's this baby here who I'm carrying on my back.
Mm.
And during that pregnancy, my pregnancy was extremely high risk. I had a 9 times. So because of the condition that I had, it's associated with a 9 times more likely risk of dying from it.
Mm.
And then also being black in the UK, pregnant, you are 5 times, it's now 4.5, it used to be 5 times. 4 times more likely to die just because you're black, because racism, because obviously there's racism in healthcare, institutional and also individual. So you're less likely to be listened to. So you have to be advocating for yourself. You're less likely to be taken more seriously. So anyway, I had all this high risk of death. So it made me confront my own mortality. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can actually die. I mean, I knew it, but I never actually knew it, or I never actually sat down to think about it. And knowing that has freed me in so many ways. I have been able to do so much than I ever thought possible. There were a lot of things that I've done, like I've done some workshops and things which were in like my 5-year plans of life. I was like in my 10-year goal, I want to start doing group therapy and all this. But
Yeah.
then I was like, now that, because what happened was that I was admitted at some point in pregnancy, and then they told me because the risk of bleeding to death was so high, I had to have my blood taken every 3 days to group and cross match, so that they always have a sample of blood, so that in case I start, it was just a matter of, it was as if they were saying, just when you start bleeding, we have blood ready for you. And then I was also told stay in hospital. The plan was stay in hospital for 3 months, like until delivery.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were like, if I go back home and I start bleeding, like I'm too far from the hospital, I could just die. So all of a sudden it was so scary. But then also it made me feel like now I can live my life with not as much fear as I did before, because I know that, I don't know, what can I say, like Biansi Biakuleka sort
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
Yes. Like I feel free and I'm not worried, or like of things that I used to before, other people's opinions. I do whatever I want
Mm-hmm.
because, yeah, anyway, that's what happened to me.
That is, and some people don't. The first time somebody said a life lesson was about death, I got scared like this. Oh my gosh, it's about death. But it takes a different, I would say, not courage, but like something to look at life that way. When you've gone
Mm,
through a lot, to look
yeah.
at life in a different perspective, like no matter death, no matter what, and it's you understand it. Like you get to the point, and I want to kudos for you for whatever you've gone through to even be still strong and knowing like yeah life can go any day anytime, and that's a reminder for all of us. Now that
Mm.
you've shared about that, what gets you excited about life?
What gets me excited? There's a lot of things that get me excited, but one of them is a project. I love a good project
Yeah.
to do with therapy, actually, like doing therapy for people. Especially I like group work. I like group work. I like working with moms, and I like when I'm working with someone and they start to turn their life around, or they start to realize it for themselves. Because
Hmm.
initially you're kind of pushing them, or try showing them patterns that they can't see. But when they start to see it by themselves, and I feel like, yeah, my work here has been done.
Yeah,
That really excites me. Yeah.
that's awesome. And I've enjoyed talking to you. I've enjoyed learning things from you, and I hope my listeners too will learn a thing or two from what we've talked about today. My final question is it's my signature question I ask everybody on the podcast. Who would you like to see on my podcast next? And you help me connect me to that person so they can come here and share.
I think you should have Sharifa Namusisi
Yeah,
of Let's Fix It Counseling.
yeah,
Um, She sounds really busy though.
yeah.
If you can fit into her schedule, because she has so much going on from
Mhm.
what I can see. But yeah, I think she'd be quite a good person to have.
Yeah, I usually ask people ahead of time, and I'm not like in a rush or anything. I can schedule 2 months ahead, 3 months ahead.
Mm. Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry I was a bit all over the place, what with the baby.
It's
And now he's
understandable.
sleeping just in perfect time, just when now time is up.
Yeah. I say I respect. I recorded with Fiona. No, not Fiona. I recorded with Be Your Own Boss, and actually, that's podcast will come out next weekend. But her baby was coming back from not baby. Our kid
Mm,
was coming back from school, and she
mm.
was doing a podcast here, and like, oh, my baby is coming back, and I feel bad when I take time out of parents away from their kids because I take that very special when parents want to spend time with their children because I really like that. Thank you very much, and let's keep in touch.
Harley, thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you. Hey there, this is Bani Kibuka, the host of the Ugandan Boy Talk Show. Thanks for watching and listening to my podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it with a friend and recommend somebody to this podcast. Don't forget to leave a feedback on this podcast because that's how we grow. And also don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. Join us on our social media platforms on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So we'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much and be blessed.